Laura pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and closed her eyes tiredly. It was slowly getting dark outside. The streetlights were just starting to come on along the deserted street. In the reflection of the dim glass, she saw her pale face and the shadows of the past that wouldn't let go. She was 35, but today she felt older, perhaps because childhood memories were insistently knocking on her memory again. Behind Laura, her mother's voice rang out quietly, like an echo from the past. The main thing is that the man spends the night at home. We'll survive everything else. These words, heard once in her youth, were forever etched into her consciousness. Then, many years ago, little Laura did not fully understand what her mother meant, but very soon she had to figure it out. She remembers that evening with frightening clarity. She was 16. Her father had stayed out late, and her mother was pacing nervously in their tiny living room. It was past midnight when the front door clicked quietly. Laura peered out of her room and saw her father, slightly disheveled, his shirt collar unbuttoned. He smelled of someone else's perfume. Her mother stood frozen in the middle of the room, her arms crossed over her chest. "Where have you been?" she asked quietly but firmly as her father crossed the threshold. The father seemed to have prepared his answer in advance. "I was held up at work. The project is urgent. I warned you." Laura noticed the corner of her mother's mouth twitch. She, too, caught the sweet scent of perfume that hung around her father. Her mother came closer and tugged sharply at the collar of his shirt. A spot of lipstick showed on the white fabric. A heavy silence hung in the room. "Is this also from work?" The mother couldn't find the answer right away, her voice breaking. The father pushed her hand away in irritation. "Stop it. You understand everything yourself." He walked further into the apartment, and his mother remained standing, her hands helplessly hanging at her sides. Laura watched from the darkness of the hallway, holding her breath. She was afraid to go out, and at the same time she wanted to rush to her mother. But she did not move. After a few agonizing seconds, Mom suddenly pulled herself together, as if putting on a mask of calm. She closed the front door tightly, locked the door, and said unexpectedly evenly, "Okay, the main thing is that you came back home." Laura couldn't believe her ears. She expected screaming, tears, a row anything but these calm words. Her father nodded as if this was how it should be and headed to the bathroom without even looking at his wife. And her mother? Her mother turned around and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on as if nothing had happened. Later that night, Laura walked timidly into the kitchen. Her mother was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring blankly into space. In front of her was her father's shirt with the lipstick stain. Her mother noticed her daughter and tried to smile. "Go to sleep, daughter. Everything is fine." But her voice was hoarse. Laura sat down next to her, not taking her eyes off her mother's face. In the semi-darkness, it seemed alien, a frozen mask without emotions. "Mom," Laura began quietly, not knowing how to ask what had really happened. "Will everything be okay with Dad?" Mom slowly turned her head towards her. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears. "Of course, everything will be fine," she answered too quickly. "Just remember, Laura, the main thing is that the man comes home. If he spends the night at home, it means the family is intact. The rest can be lived through." Laura was silent. Everything inside her protested against these words, but her mother did not explain anything else. She stood up, stroked her daughter's hair, and went into the bedroom, taking the shirt. And Laura remained sitting in the kitchen, trying to comprehend, is this really possible? Is it possible to close your eyes to betrayal just to maintain the appearance of a family? Years passed, but Laura did not forget that night. At the time, she thought she would never be able to accept something like that in her own life. But her mother's words were stuck in her subconscious, rooted there. Laura's young mind resisted, but her mother's example said otherwise. Mom and Dad did not get divorced. They continued to live together. And although a cold shadow ran between them, outwardly everything remained the same: family holidays, dinners, shared photos for relatives. Mom pretended that nothing had happened and made those around her believe it. Laura graduated from school, then college, and at home everything went according to the old scenario. From time to time, her father stayed late at work. Her mother turned a blind eye to it. Only sometimes, late at night, she allowed herself to cry quietly in the kitchen, thinking that the children were asleep. But Laura knew. She saw everything and took it all in. And over time, she began to understand. Her mother chose to endure, just not to be left alone. The main thing is that a man spends the night at home. This phrase became an unspoken motto in the family, although it was no longer repeated out loud. Laura involuntarily absorbed it with her mother's milk, and when she grew up and began her adult life, it seemed natural to her that men could cheat after all. That's male nature, as her mother once said. The main thing is to keep up appearances and keep the family together. Standing at the window in her home many years later, Laura opened her eyes. In the mirrored reflection of the glass, she saw a reflection no longer of a teenager, but of a grown woman with a tired look. Yes, she had learned her mother's lesson, and that lesson became her own curse. She heard footsteps behind her. Laura shuddered and turned around. Brandon, her husband, was walking down the hallway toward her. Tall, athletic, with a slightly mocking smile on his lips. Once, this smile made her heart beat faster. But now Laura felt only the usual anxiety. She straightened up, hiding her face. "Hey," Brandon said as he passed by the living room. "I won't make it to dinner tonight. Practice is late." He didn't even look at her, typing something into his phone. Laura squeezed her fingers. Her heart ached painfully at the familiar words. Training was delayed, too similar to what her father had said so many years ago. "Okay," Laura answered, just as quietly as her mother once did. Brandon had already gone into the bedroom to change, and she remained at the window, watching him go. Bitterness rose in her chest. At that moment, Laura realized her own story was unfolding according to her parents' script. Mother's legacy, her attitudes and fears, all this brought her to where she is now. To continue living the way her mother lived, or to try to break free. Then, in her youth, she swore to herself not to repeat her mother's fate. But reality turned out to be more complicated. Laura ran her hand over the cold glass, trying to calm herself. A long night of loneliness awaited her while her husband was delayed somewhere. She knew that most likely not at work or at training. But as her mother taught her, she tried to convince herself otherwise. After all, the main thing is that he comes home, and the rest. She will try to survive the rest, as her mother did. Memories of the beginning of her relationship with Brandon were always bittersweet for Laura. Sweet because their first years together truly did feel like a lifelong honeymoon. Bitter because, looking back, Laura knew that fate had already been setting its first traps. But she hadn't seen it then, 8 years ago. They met at the fitness center where Brandon worked as an instructor. Laura signed up for group classes on the advice of a friend she wanted to get in shape after her office job. Brandon noticed her on the very first day. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an open, white-toothed smile, he literally radiated charm. When he came up to correct her stance during an exercise, Laura felt her heart jump into her throat. She smiled shyly, and he struck up a conversation. After the workout, Brandon suggested drinking a protein shake in the cafe at the club. Laura agreed, although she usually hurried home right away. They talked for over an hour at a table in the corner of an empty cafe. Brandon turned out to be a great conversationalist. He joked, asked about her, and listened attentively. Laura didn't even notice how she opened up to him. She told him about her work as a marketer in a small company, about her hobbies of reading detective stories, and even mentioned her parents. Brandon listened to the story about how her father worked a lot and how her mother pulled everything on herself and nodded sympathetically. He seemed so understanding and caring that Laura completely lost her head that evening. Their romance developed rapidly. Just a few weeks after they met, they were practically inseparable. Brandon showered her with attention. He met her after work, brought her flowers for no reason, and arranged surprises. Once, he called her in the middle of the night and said, "Get ready, let's go look at the stars." Laura was taken aback at first, but he insisted. They drove out of town, spread a blanket on the hood of the car, and lay there, looking at the summer starry sky. Brandon talked about his dreams. opening his own gym, becoming a personal coach, working for himself. Laura caught every word, admiring his ambitions. She had never met such a goal-oriented man. 6 months after their first meeting, Brandon proposed to her. It happened on her birthday, which they celebrated together by the sea. The evening beach, the quiet sound of the surf, the lights of the garlands on the terrace of the bungalow. Brandon got down on one knee and took out a small velvet case. Laura caught her breath. He said simple but sincere words. "You make me better. Marry me." She burst into tears of happiness and said yes, almost not believing that everything was happening for real. It seemed like a fairy tale had come true. Their wedding was modest but heartfelt. Only close friends and relatives attended the ceremony. Laura's mother, watching her daughter beaming in a white dress, wiped away tears of joy. She whispered to Laura as she passed by, "Take care of him, daughter." At the time, these words did not seem strange to Laura. She was too happy. Jake, an old friend of the family and the same age as Laura, also came to congratulate the newlyweds. He gave them a beautiful carved box and, hugging Laura, quietly said, "If anything happens, I'm here." She then only laughed in response. "What could happen, Jake? I have a wonderful husband now." Jake tried to smile, but a shadow of worry flashed in his eyes. Perhaps he already felt something that she did not notice. The first years of marriage flew by like one happy moment. Laura threw herself into her new life. She was very proud of her husband and tried to help him in everything. In the evenings, after her main job, Laura helped Brandon create training programs for his private clients, made advertising posts for him on social networks, and created a website to promote him as a personal trainer. Brandon appreciated her support. He often repeated to his friends, "Without Laura, I would not have decided to open my own business." It was true. Thanks to their joint efforts, a year after the wedding, Brandon was able to leave the fitness center and start a private practice. They even got a small space for a training studio and rented a bright hall with mirrors. Laura dealt with administrative issues, kept the schedule, bookkeeping, and communicated with clients. They enjoyed building this small business together. It was their common brainchild, replacing children. For now, they decided to wait a little about babies, first get on their feet. Laura recalled that time as the brightest Anhoney plot their lives. They laughed a lot, made plans. On weekends, they went on bike rides or met up with friends. In the evenings, they did puzzles or cooked dinner together, making fun of each other. Brandon seemed like the perfect husband, caring, funny, reliable. Of course, he spent a lot of time working, but Laura was there, and this brought them closer. She felt needed and loved. Sometimes, however, old fears would awaken in her soul. Whenever Brandon stayed with a client a little longer than promised, Laura would catch herself in a stupid anxiety. What if? But each time he would return with the same dazzling smile, hug her, and all doubts would disappear. "Nonsense," Laura would tell herself. "Everything is different with us. Brandon is not like his father." And she believed it with all her heart. Jake occasionally visited or invited Laura for coffee, but less and less often. Each had their own lives. He moved to another area and worked a lot in a company. Despite this, he and Laura maintained a warm relationship, called each other. Brandon treated her friendship with Jake normally, without showing jealousy. He was confident in himself and seemed to trust his wife completely, and Laura appreciated this trust. So, about 3 years passed from the wedding day. Their business was going well. The client base was growing. Brandon became a fairly well-known personal trainer in his city. Many people came to him. Word of mouth and activity on social networks did their job. Laura was happy with her husband's success as if it were her own. It seemed to her that they were the perfect team, and only more happiness was ahead. She did not even have time to notice how the first cracks began to appear under the thin, glossy surface of their married life. The fourth year of their marriage began routinely and calmly. Laura continued to take care of the studio's affairs, although over time Brandon became more and more independent. He assured her that he could handle the schedule himself and tried to persuade Laura not to spend all her evenings on it. "Rest, take care of yourself," he said with a smile. Laura gratefully accepted her husband's care, although it was strange for her to slowly move away from the things they used to do together. But she decided that if Brandon wanted it that way, it meant that he trusted her and wanted the best for her. However, it was when Laura had more free time that she began to notice things she had not seen before. One afternoon, Laura decided to drop by their training studio unannounced. She needed to drop off some new brochures and just wanted to please her husband by bringing him his favorite coffee. It was around noon, the time he usually had private lessons. Laura walked inside. The lights were on in the small room and soft music was playing. She peered through the half-open door and froze. Brandon was there not alone. On an exercise mat in front of a mirrored wall, he was paired with his client, a young woman in a tight tracksuit. They appeared to be doing a stretching exercise. The woman was sitting on the floor. Brandon was kneeling behind her, leaning her torso forward. His hands were on her shoulders, almost hugging her. The client was laughing softly. "Oh, it's so painful," she said playfully, throwing her head back onto his shoulder. Brandon smiled too. "Be patient, Jess. The result is worth it," he said softly, looking at her almost tenderly. Laura felt her insides tighten. She suddenly felt uneasy about the scene. Their pose seemed too intimate, the woman's laughter too familiar. She stood there for a few seconds, confused, feeling out of place. At that moment, Brandon noticed her reflection in the mirror. He instantly removed his hands from the client and rose to his feet. "Laura? Hello?" His voice sounded deliberately cheerful. The young woman also turned around, looking at the guest with curiosity. Laura tried to smile. "Hi, I just stopped by. Brought coffee." She held up the cups she was still holding, feeling ridiculous. "How sweet of you," Brandon said, a little too loudly. He was clearly nervous. "Meet Jessica, my client. Jess, this is my wife, Laura." Jessica smiled, adjusting her hair. "Nice to meet you. Your husband is a great trainer. I haven't been with him long, but I can already see progress." "I'm glad to hear it," Laura replied, trying to sound pleasant. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why hadn't Brandon told her he had an off-site class? Why weren't the cars there? And most importantly, what was going on between him and this radiant girl with the perfect figure? But she couldn't show jealousy in front of strangers. "Thanks for the coffee, honey." Brandon stepped toward her, awkwardly kissed her on the cheek, and took the cups. "I was just taking a break." Laura felt she couldn't stay there for another minute. Her temples were pounding, her cheeks were burning with humiliation. Even though everything looked innocent on the outside, a woman's heart sensed something was wrong. "I'll probably go. I won't interfere," she said quietly. "Already?" the husband asked, but seemed to sigh with relief. "See you at home, okay?" Laura nodded and hurried away, feeling Jessica's eyes on her back. She sat in the car for a moment, staring straight ahead. "It's probably nothing," she tried to convince herself. "It's just work." He really was helping her stretch. But there was no escape from the persistent thoughts. They were too close, too cheerful. That same evening, Laura couldn't stand it any longer and carefully asked her husband. "Today in the studio with a client. You mentioned Jessica earlier?" Brandon seemed to be waiting for a conversation. He shrugged. "I don't think so. She's just joined. She's been training for only a couple of weeks. She's very promising. She wants to compete in bikini fitness, so I'm paying attention to her, helping her with her individual program." "I see." Laura lowered her eyes. "You just seemed so friendly." "Well, I try to create an atmosphere of trust," he explained, irritatingly calm. "Clients appreciate a personal approach. That's all it means." He spoke confidently, but Laura caught a hint of irritation. She sighed quietly. "Sorry, don't be offended. I guess I'm jealous for no reason." Brandon immediately softened and hugged her. "Of course, it's in vain, silly. You know, you're my wife, the love of my life. Clients work." Laura nodded, burying her face in his shoulder. He stroked her back, repeating that he loved her. And yet, a strange aftertaste remained. Over the next few weeks, these little things started happening more often. One night, late at night, their home phone rang. Laura, already in bed, picked up the phone. "Hello?" In response, there was only silence. Then a quiet female voice was heard. "This. Can I have Brandon?" Laura was surprised. "He's not around." "Who is it?" There was a pause. Then the phone beeped and the other person hung up. When Laura told Brandon this, he shrugged. "Probably the wrong number. Don't worry about it." But she noticed her husband avoided meeting her gaze and was tense. At night, lying with their backs to each other, they both could not fall asleep for a long time. Another time, while cleaning Brandon's car, Laura found someone else's hair clip under the seat. She showed it to her husband. He laughed. "Oh, these are probably the daughters of one of the clients. She brought her child to training, and she must have dropped it. I'll have to return it when the opportunity arises." The explanation seemed logical, but for some reason it did not calm Laura's soul. Doubts were gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Brandon was staying late for work more and more often. Sometimes he wouldn't answer his phone for an hour or two when he was out of the house, and then he'd explain that his phone was in the locker room or dead. Laura told herself, as usual, that everything was fine, but her anxiety was growing. Finally, she decided to share her doubts with someone she had trusted since childhood, her mother. Late in the evening, after another day of nervously waiting for her husband, Laura called her mother. Trying to speak calmly, she mentioned that Brandon worked a lot and sometimes stayed late. She hinted at her jealousy. "I guess I'm worrying for nothing. He just has so many beautiful clients." The mother on the other end of the phone sighed and answered in a tone that brooked no argument. "Laura, stop making things up. All men look elsewhere. That's life. The main thing is that yours comes home. Got it? Don't do anything stupid. Don't ruin the family because of your fantasies." "Yes, Mom, you're right," Laura quietly agreed. After hanging up, she sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Her mother's words were reassuring and at the same time hurtful. She felt ashamed of her suspicions. After all, it was true Brandon always came back to her. He was at home, close by. Wasn't that enough to make her happy? Her mother had lived with her father for so many years, and nothing the family had survived. Was Laura really weaker? So Laura tried to suppress her anxiety. She put on the mask of an understanding wife again, like her mother once did. She decided not to notice the first cracks, convincing herself, "Everything will be fine. This is just a difficult period." It seemed to her that if she was an ideal wife and did not make scandals, then the danger would pass by itself. September arrived, which Laura later called the month of signals. In just 4 weeks, alarm bells began ringing one after another, as if fate was persistently trying to open her eyes. At the beginning of the month, Laura noticed that Brandon had changed the password on his smartphone. They had never had any secrets before. They knew each other's codes and could easily borrow her husband's phone when needed. But one day, while trying to open Brandon's phone to answer a call from a sports equipment supplier, Laura discovered that the usual code didn't work. She looked up in surprise. "Have you changed your password?" Brandon glanced at her and replied indifferently. "Oh yeah, my phone was glitching, so I installed a new one. I forgot to tell you." "Will you tell me now?" She tried to smile. The husband shook his head. "Later, okay? I'll call the supplier myself now." Later, he never said, and Laura was embarrassed to remind him, afraid of seeming suspicious. But the aftertaste remained. A week after this incident, Brandon suddenly changed his appearance. He bought himself a new cologne, expensive, with an unusually sharp masculine aroma. He began to carefully style his hair with gel before going out, which he had not done before, and updated his wardrobe. Instead of his usual sports sweatshirts, he began to wear stylish shirts under jeans when he went to meetings with corporate clients. Laura, noticing the changes, praised him. "You are so elegant today. New style." He chuckled. "I want to attract reputable clients. I need to match them." She nodded, trying to push away the nagging thought that he might be dressing up for more than just his clients. The intimate side of their life had also changed. Brandon began to avoid intimacy, citing fatigue. Previously, they regularly spent nights together in tenderness, but now he often fell asleep, turning to the wall, barely touching the pillow. Laura tried to justify everything. He had a lot of work, got up at 5 in the morning to run with a client, of course he was tired. But her heart suggested another explanation, which she stubbornly brushed aside. One afternoon, Laura received a text from Jake asking to meet after work. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and she agreed, feeling that she needed a friendly conversation. They settled down at a table in a coffee shop. Jake fiddled with his cup for a long time, clearly nervous. Finally, gathering his courage, he said quietly, "Laura, I need to tell you something. I saw Brandon the other day." "Well, it's not surprising," she tried to joke. "He often wanders around the city." Jake shook his head. "I didn't see him alone. He was in a shopping mall, in the jewelry department, with some girl. They were looking at jewelry." Laura froze, her fingers turning white on the cup. "Are you sure?" His voice became hoarse. "I saw them quite close. He had his arm around her waist. I'm very sorry." Jake looked at Laura with sympathetic eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine. Her heart began to pound in her throat. "Maybe this is a misunderstanding," she whispered. "Maybe the client asked for help choosing a gift." His own words sounded ridiculous. Jake carefully touched her hand. "Laura, I don't want to hurt you, but I thought you should know. It's up to you to decide what to do about it. Just take care of yourself, okay?" She abruptly pulled her hand away, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this, Jake?" she blurted out. "To make me suffer. You don't know exactly what's going on between them." Jake fell silent, confused. Laura stood up, feeling hurt and ashamed of her outburst. "Sorry, I have to go." "Laura," he began, but she had already hurried to the exit without turning around. At home, she burst into tears. Jake's words only confirmed what she feared, but the internal protest was too strong. She loved her husband and did not want to believe that he was capable of such betrayal. Besides, her mother's instructions still sounded in her head. "Don't do stupid things, save the family." Laura decided to ignore what Jake had said. For a few days, she stopped communicating with him completely, didn't answer his calls, she couldn't. It was too painful to admit that her best friend was talking about her husband as a cheater. Jake eventually wrote her an email, apologizing for interfering and assuring her that he was always ready to help. Laura read it and cried again, but she didn't dare answer. Meanwhile, the signals continued to come in. One of the regular customers, Mrs. Parker, casually asked Laura, "Does your husband train alone now?" "I saw his new assistant." Laura frowned. "Assistant? No, he doesn't have an assistant. It's strange. I came to sign up, and he was in the hall with a young girl, a brunette. They were discussing the schedule so animatedly that they didn't notice me right away. I thought he hired an assistant." Laura thanked Mrs. Parker for the information and quickly changed the subject. Inside, everything was burning with jealousy. What brunette? She decided to ask Brandon directly that evening. "Did you hire someone for our studio?" the client said today. "No, I didn't hire anyone," he quickly answered, not even letting her finish. "I must have imagined it." He turned back to the TV, clearly closing the subject. Laura didn't insist, but the feeling that her husband was lying to her only grew stronger. The whole of September passed like this, a series of small and large signs of infidelity. Laura walked as if in a fog, constantly listening to every rustle, catching every change in her husband's behavior. She lost several kilograms from stress and began to sleep poorly. Brandon pretended that nothing special was happening and was friendly as always. This drove her even more crazy. Maybe all this really was just her inflated fears. The end of the month brought the biggest blow. Brandon announced that he was going to a fitness seminar in a nearby town for the weekend. Laura usually accompanied him on such trips, but this time he said, "It will be boring there, just lectures. Rest at home, okay? I'll be back in 2 days." He kissed her on the forehead and smiled so calmly, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Laura was restless all weekend. She tried to call her husband on Saturday evening, but his phone was disconnected. On Sunday morning, he called her himself and said briefly, Everything is fine. A lot of work. I hardly slept. I'm tired. I'll be home tomorrow afternoon. Her attempts to ask questions were met with polite weariness. He even seemed irritated. Laura, what are you doing as a control? I'm at a seminar, busy. I'll tell you later. After the call, she sat for a long time with the phone in her hand. For the first time, a terrible thought crept into her head. What if there was no seminar? But she pushed it away. It couldn't be. He had sent the program by email in advance, and it really was a newsletter from the Fitness Association. But how could she prove that he was really there? On Monday afternoon, Brandon returned. He brought a bunch of brochures, even a certificate of participation, everything as it should be. Laura, having gathered her courage, asked why the phone was turned off. Her husband explained that he forgot the charger, and there was no time to buy one, and they talked in the hotel lobby where there were no outlets. He spoke evenly, his eyes did not dart. Any stranger would have believed him. But not Laura. She noticed a pale trace of a scratch on his neck, as if someone's nails had left a loving autograph. When his wife asked what it was, he mechanically touched his neck and grinned. Oh, I picked up the dumbbell awkwardly and the edge caught me. Nonsense. At that moment, something inside Laura broke. The fears and doubts that had been suppressed for so long burst forth at once. She hadn't said anything out loud yet, but she already knew. He was lying. Lying to her face. It was a hot end of September. There was an irritating, sultry tension in the air, like before a thunderstorm. Laura could feel it coming. And soon it did, on that panicked night that changed everything. It all happened in early October, on a cold, windy night that Laura would never forget. Brandon had warned her the night before that he would be late. A client had an urgent request for a late-night nutrition consultation. This usually happened, and Laura tried to react calmly. But this time, something was different. A premonition of trouble had been scratching at her heart since sunset. She made dinner for 8, hoping that her husband would return. But the hours passed, the plates grew cold, and the apartment remained empty. At 9 o'clock, Laura texted Brandon, "Are you coming soon? Food is waiting." There was no answer. At 10, she called. The phone was buzzing. Laura paced the living room, nervously fiddling with her hands. Calm down, she told herself. He's probably just busy. He'll call back. By midnight, the anxiety had turned to terror. Brandon wasn't answering calls or texts. His location wasn't being tracked by the app, as if his phone was turned off or dead. Horrible thoughts crept into his head. An accident, a hospital. Or was he just in someone else's bed? Laura tried to push away the second, concentrating on the first. If an accident had happened, she had to act. She called the emergency departments of the 2 nearest hospitals. Not a single patient named Brandon Mitchell had been admitted. It was too early to report it to the police, and what would they say? My husband didn't come home on time. He had only been gone a few hours longer than usual. Hardly anyone would take that seriously. At 2 in the morning, she couldn't take it anymore and dialed Jake. Her voice was shaking. "Sorry. You were probably sleeping." "Laura, what happened?" Jake immediately became wary. She sobbed. "Brandon, he's not here. He was supposed to come this evening, and he's not answering. His phone is off." Jake quickly asked the addresses of the hospitals she had inquired about and tried to reassure her. "Let me come, and we'll think together about what to do." "No, no need," she whispered, even though she really wanted to not be alone right now. She didn't finish, but Jake understood. "Okay, then I'll stay in touch for now. Are you holding on?" Laura wanted to say yes, but her voice was trembling treacherously. In the end, she simply squeezed out, "I'm scared, Jake." "I know. Try to breathe deeply. He's probably just." He hesitated, not knowing how to console her. Maybe his phone died and he was delayed somewhere. Anything can happen. Laura was silent. There were no more tears, only the sticky fear had cooled. Around 3 in the morning, while Jake was still on the line, there was a noise of a door opening. Laura jumped. He came, she breathed into the phone. "Thank God." Then I'll call back, she said quickly and hung up, heading into the hallway. Brandon was indeed back. He was slightly unsteady, smelling of a mixture of alcohol and sweet perfume. There was a smudge of lipstick on his cheek. When he saw his wife, he tried to smile. "Hello." Laura looked at him, speechless with relief and anger at the same time, the last hours of fear now spilling out into bitterness. "Where have you been?" Her voice sounded louder than she expected. "I couldn't find a place for myself." Brandon winced as he pulled off his jacket. "I told you, everything is dragging on. Why are you yelling in the middle of the night?" "In the middle of the night?" Laura smiled bitterly. 3 hours. Your phone wasn't answering. "My phone died." He waved it off, avoiding looking her in the eyes. "Don't get worked up." He moved into the kitchen to pour water. Laura followed him closely. "Have you been drinking? You smell like booze." And she took a sharp breath women's perfume. Brandon turned around, frowning. "You interrogated me in the middle of the night? I went into a bar, and the perfume. Maybe someone spilled it in the bar next door. How would I know?" "What bar?" She persisted. "You said a consultation at a client's home." "Well, yeah, we decided to go out later, celebrated our successes." "What's the difference?" Brandon slammed his glass on the tabletop. "What are you trying to achieve, huh?" Laura had a lump in her throat that made it difficult to speak, but she continued. "The truth, Brandon. I need the truth. Who were you really with just now?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "I told you, with the client." "Who? Jessica?" She suddenly blurted out the first name that came to mind. Brandon looked up sharply. "What does Jessica have to do with this? Are you crazy?" Laura felt herself losing her composure. She imagined her husband in the arms of that young girl or another. It didn't matter. The fact of betrayal was in the air. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can see that you're lying to me." "You don't see anything," he snapped, his voice icy with rage. "You seem to have nothing better to do, so you're making up nonsense." "Nonsense." Laura sighed, trying not to burst into tears again. "You come home drunk in the morning, with lipstick on your face. Do you think I'm blind?" Brandon rubbed his cheek mechanically, wiping away the faded pink mark, and narrowed his eyes angrily. "Look how observant you are. Maybe you want to let me smell your shirt too." Laura turned pale at such insolence. "How can you say that?" He moved closer, looming over her. "What's wrong with that? You set the conditions for me yourself. The main thing is that I came home. Do you remember? Or have you forgotten your mother's words?" His sentence hit home. Laura recoiled as if he had slapped her in the face. Her chest went cold. Brandon said through gritted teeth, looking her straight in the eyes. "You always knew it. I'm a man, I have needs. But I'm with you, I live with you, I come back to you. What else do you want?" For a moment, Laura was speechless. Her heart was pounding. Had he confessed? In essence, yes, cynically justifying his betrayal, using her own fears as a cover. "Brandon," was all she could breathe out, feeling tears welling up. He stepped back and waved his hand. "That's it. Enough. I'm going to bed." "Wait." Laura grabbed his sleeve. "We need to talk." He jerked free. "Not now. It's early in the morning. Go to bed. Enough scenes." With these words, he left the kitchen, leaving her standing there in a daze. A minute later, the door to the guest bedroom slammed apparently. He decided to spend the night separately. Laura slowly sank into a chair. She was shivering, although the kitchen was stuffy. Her husband's words echoed in her ears like a painful ringing. "The main thing is that I came home." It was a sentence to everything she tried to believe in. He knew about her fear of loneliness, he knew about her mother's philosophy, and he cold-bloodedly took advantage of it. She suddenly felt like she couldn't get enough air. Her chest tightened, as if an icy vacuum had opened up inside her. Laura sat up, but the world swam before her eyes. "Breathe, I need to breathe," flashed through her mind. She took a step toward the sink, but her knees buckled. Laura collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her fingers were numb. "Am I dying?" she thought in panic. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. A wave of horror washed over her completely. Laura helplessly tried to call for help, but only a weak wheeze came out of her throat. How much time passed, she didn't know. Gradually, her breathing evened out on its own. Her body became heavy, sticky sweat appeared on her forehead. Laura lay on the cool kitchen floor, feeling tears roll from the corners of her closed eyes. It wasn't crying, rather, her body was simply throwing out excess tension. A few minutes later, she sat up with difficulty, leaning her back against the closet. One thought pounded in her head: this can't go on anymore. She needed help, she couldn't do it alone. If she didn't take care of herself now, she would simply go crazy or break down completely. Laura stood up, holding onto the wall. On wobbly legs, she walked to the bedroom, where her phone lay on the nightstand. With trembling fingers, she typed into the search engine, "Psychotherapist anxiety help." She didn't care how much it would cost or what others would think. She wasn't going to involve her husband or even her mother in her plans. This was a cry for help for herself. That very night, when the house was plunged into darkness and only lines were flashing on the phone screen, Laura found the contacts of several specialists. One of them, a female psychologist, was working not far from her house and had a free window for the next morning. Laura, without thinking, sent a message to the number indicated, begging to see her as soon as possible. Laura entered the small, cozy office with trembling knees. A woman of about 40 with a kind, attentive look was sitting on a soft chair by the window. "Laura," she asked softly, "come in and sit down." Laura sat down hesitantly on the sofa opposite. Her heart was pounding. She had never been to a psychologist before and didn't know where to start. "My name is Emily," the woman introduced herself. "You can just call me by my first name. How are you feeling right now?" "I don't even know." Laura tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "I'm a little nervous." "That's okay," Emily nodded. "The first time is always nerve-wracking. Would you like some water?" "No, thank you," she whispered, clutching her handkerchief. She had been afraid the whole way that she would burst into tears right there on the threshold. Emily settled herself more comfortably and, looking calm and inviting, asked, "What brings you to me, Laura?" The question was so simple and yet so difficult. Laura was silent for a few seconds, gathering her courage. Then she began quietly, I I have problems in the family. I am constantly worried. I hardly sleep. I think I am going crazy with my thoughts." Her voice trembled treacherously. She fell silent, biting her lip to keep from bursting into tears in the first minute. "It's okay, you can cry if you want," Emily said softly. "It's safe to express any emotion here." These simple words untied the knot inside. Laura burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Through her sobs, she blurted out crumpled words. "I think my husband is cheating on me. No, I'm sure. And I don't know how to live. I tried so hard, and now, I just can't anymore." She spoke haltingly, jumping from thought to thought, about the constant suspicions, about that night of panic, about the fear of losing her family. Emily listened attentively, without interrupting, only quietly offering paper napkins. Once the initial emotional storm had died down, there was silence. Laura sat staring at the pattern of the carpet at her feet, feeling tired and relieved at the same time that she had spoken out to someone for the first time who did not judge or dismiss her. "You've been through a lot," Emily finally said softly. "It's good of you to come for help. It takes courage." Laura nodded weakly. She was indeed scared, but now it seemed to be a little easier to breathe. "Let's try to sort this out gradually," the therapist suggested. "You said you suspect your husband of cheating. How long have you had these suspicions?" Laura wiped her nose and, swallowing the lump in her throat, began to tell the chronology. The first alarm bells a year ago, then more and more often, about the recent seminar and the night when Brandon basically confessed. She also mentioned her mother's words, which seemed to hold her all these years. "Stop," Emily raised her hand when she heard the phrase about her mother. "Tell me, what exactly did my mother say?" Laura looked down. "My mother always said, the main thing is that a man spends the night at home. She lived like that with my father. He cheated on her, and she tolerated it. And she taught me from childhood to turn a blind eye to this for the sake of the family. Emily tilted her head thoughtfully. And it turns out that you accepted this attitude as the norm. I think so, Laura smiled bitterly. I was always afraid of repeating my mother's fate, but in the end, I chose such a husband myself. Or allowed him to become like that, I don't know. There was desperation in her voice. The therapist asked softly, "Do you feel like you are to blame for what is happening?" Sometimes. Probably yes. Maybe I'm not good enough as a wife. Since he's looking for something on the side, maybe I couldn't hold on, didn't keep an eye on him. Saying it out loud was especially painful. Tears filled my eyes again. Listen, Emily leaned forward a little, meeting her gaze. Your husband's infidelity is entirely his choice and responsibility, not yours. No one forces their partner to cheat except them. Do you understand? Laura was silent, digesting these words. Deep down she knew it, but the guilt she had been instilling in herself for years would not let go so easily. Your mother probably meant well, the therapist continued. Her value system was family above all else, and she was willing to put up with pain just to keep the family together on the outside. But that's not the only way, and it's not necessarily the healthiest, right? I'm not sure, Laura answered honestly. Mom has been patient all her life, and she and Dad are still together. Maybe she really is happy in her own way. And what do you think? Is she happy? Laura remembered her mother's empty eyes over a cup of tea at night, the old, suppressed tears. I don't know, she whispered. I don't think so, but she'll never admit it. So, by continuing on this path, you risk repeating her misfortune, Emily concluded quietly. Is that what you want? No, of course not, Laura blurted out hotly. I don't want to live like this. Then why do you live? The therapist asked quietly, but very clearly. Laura was taken aback. Such a direct question confused her. She hesitated. I'm afraid of ruining the marriage. What if I regret it later? What if I can't cope alone? These are natural fears, Emily nodded. It's hard not to think about them. But let's look at the facts. Your marriage is already essentially broken, emotionally. You're unhappy, living in constant stress. How did you sleep last night? Nothing, Laura closed her eyes tiredly. I don't sleep almost every night. My heart is pounding all the time. I wake up from the slightest sound. You live like you're on a powder keg. Is that really a preserved family? Laura shook her head. A wave of pain rose in her chest, but she felt that the psychologist's words were hitting the mark. Let's define your goals, Emily said more gently. What would you like to achieve through therapy? Laura thought. I want to stop being afraid. I want to get myself back. Her thoughts went. I want to stop worrying and tormenting myself all the time, she said. I want to figure out what to do next. With my marriage, with my life. I'm confused and completely unsure. Well put, Emily smiled. We'll definitely work on that. Thus began Laura's long-awaited journey to herself. Over the next few weeks, she went to weekly sessions with Emily. With each session, she felt a little better. Therapy was hard work. She had to remember painful moments from the past, sort out her childhood, her relationship with her parents. There were days when Laura left the session devastated and cried in the car all the way home. But little by little, it was as if she was emerging from under the water, learning to breathe again. Emily helped her realize that all her life Laura had put other people's interests above her own first, trying to be a good daughter, not judging her father for the sake of her mother, then a good wife, turning a blind eye to obvious things for the sake of her husband. But in this process, she completely lost herself, her boundaries. You have the right not to put up with the fact that you are hurt, Emily repeated more than once. You don't have to tolerate betrayal just because you are afraid of loneliness. Little by little, Laura began to believe these words. She stopped looking for flaws in herself, which she used to justify her husband's infidelities. Shame and guilt weakened, giving way to a quiet determination. At one of the sessions, about a month into therapy, Laura said out loud for the first time, "I'm thinking about divorce." As she said this, she held her breath, expecting to be judged by her mother's ghost within. But the therapist only nodded. "Tell me how you feel when you say this." "It's scary," Laura admitted, and, at the same time, relief, as if an exit were opening up where there used to be a wall. Her voice trembled, but these were not tears of horror, rather, nervous excitement from the decision she had made. After this important session, Laura went outside and suddenly noticed that the sunlight seemed brighter than usual, the air fresher. She took a deep breath, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in a long time. Yes, there were still many difficulties ahead, but now she knew that she would not break. She had the support of a specialist. She was not alone. While Laura was in no hurry to announce her decision to her husband, the therapist advised her to first strengthen herself emotionally and think through practical steps. But something had already changed inexorably inside her. A new foundation had been laid: self-respect, which she had been so lacking. Time after time, Emily and Laura discussed specific plans: how to cope with anxiety, breathing exercises, grounding techniques during a panic attack, how to avoid being manipulated, recognizing the guilt her husband made her feel, and reminding herself that she was innocent. After a few weeks of working on herself, Laura was quietly surprised. She began to sleep a little better at night. Once she even heard Brandon go out on the balcony late at night to talk on the phone. Earlier, her heart would have sunk into her heels, but instead of the usual panic, she simply rolled over. "I already know who he is anyway," she thought then, unexpectedly calmly, and soon fell asleep again. It was a victory, albeit a small one. Of course, when she met her husband, she didn't say anything about the decision to get a divorce. He noticed changes in her. She no longer made scenes, didn't ask where he had been. Paradoxically, this was exactly what was starting to irritate him. He even asked suspiciously once, "You've somehow become calm. You're not jealous anymore." Laura just shrugged. "I'm probably tired. I'm tired of being nervous." Brandon chuckled and didn't ask any more questions, but he looked puzzled. Perhaps he was expecting her usual behavior: tears, reproaches, which he didn't get now. It was during these days that Laura realized she was ready for the next steps. Her hands no longer shook at the thought of breaking up. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was scary, but it was even scarier to remain in the hole from which therapy had pulled her out. One evening, after leaving Emily's next session, Laura got into the car and said out loud for the first time, alone with herself, "I'm filing for divorce." These words sounded clear and confident. She was almost afraid of her calm. But this calm was a guarantee that she was on the right path. The beginning of therapy marked the beginning of a new Laura, a Laura who values herself and is preparing to fight for her freedom and happiness. As Laura gained inner strength, she realized that an emotional decision alone was not enough. She needed to prepare practically. She did not want to rush into the deep end without any support or means of support. At the next session, Emily helped her create what she called a resource plan, a list of what would help her endure the changes. The first point was finance. Laura took up the topic without delay. Even before the wedding, she had some small savings set aside in her own account. Over the years of marriage, the account had hardly been replenished. She had invested a lot in the common cause, and the main income came from her husband's business. Now Laura regretted that she had not thought about her financial reserves earlier, but there was no time to regret. One day, while Brandon was at work, Laura sat down at the computer and opened their joint bank account. It contained the money she had saved up over the past few years for vacations and unexpected expenses. She decided to transfer half of it to her personal account, which she had opened before their marriage. She felt uneasy. It seemed like she was doing something secret. But then she remembered her husband's cold words, "The main thing is that I came home," and firmly pressed the transfer button. This was her legal money, part of the family she had supported for so many years. Next, Laura analyzed her monthly expenses. She made a rough budget for living without her husband: rent if she had to move out, food, insurance, therapist's fees. It wasn't that little. But now at least it became clear how much money she needed to earn on her own. The situation with work was uncertain. Once, before the wedding, she worked as a marketer. After helping Brandon get going, she left the office and switched to freelance projects to have a flexible schedule. She still had a couple of regular clients managing social networks for small businesses. The income was modest, more like a part-time job. Laura decided to take it up more actively. She updated her resume, posted an ad looking for orders on a professional forum. To her surprise, there were people willing to do it pretty quickly. Her experience promoting a fitness studio came in handy. She took on 2 new remote projects, which promised a stable income. There was more work, but Laura felt relieved. Now she would have her own income, and not just the money her husband gave her for expenses. The next item on the plan is housing. Their house belonged to both of them. The mortgage was paid together during the first years of marriage. The house was small, but cozy. Laura chose the curtains herself, furnished each room with love. The thought that she might have to leave these walls caused a lump in her throat. But she was determined. If the divorce happened, she would not cling to the house at any cost. The main thing was freedom from betrayal and lies. A new home could be created. Just in case, she considered her options. If the division of property went peacefully, they could sell the house and split the money. Laura could rent a nice apartment with her share and live for a while until she got back on her feet. Or maybe she could keep the house for herself, buying out Brandon's share. It all depended on how the situation turned out. To be prepared, Laura went to see a realtor to find out the approximate value of their property. She understood that this knowledge would be useful during negotiations. A special place in the plan was occupied by documents and evidence. Even in therapy, Emily advised, collect all the important papers, marriage certificate, documents for the house, car, bank statements, and if there is evidence of infidelity, save it too. Laura followed his advice. Without her husband knowing, she digitized and printed out everything she could: a copy of the marriage certificate, tax returns for the past few years, bank statements, and documents for the house and car. She put the evidence of his infidelity that she had in a separate folder: screenshots of messages, randomly found photos, and a transcript of phone calls. She ordered it from the operator. Fortunately, it was a family account, and she had access. Going through all this late at night, Laura smiled bitterly. Until recently, she was afraid to admit the truth even to herself, and now she was cold-bloodedly collecting evidence on her husband like a detective. But this practical work gave her strength. She felt in control of the situation. There was one more important resource left: people. Support from relatives and friends. Unfortunately, Laura could not discuss the situation with her mother. After that phone conversation, when her mother practically told her not to make things up and save the family, the desire to share disappeared. Her mother was the last one who would approve of the divorce. She would rather interrogate her and persuade her to change her mind. Laura decided that she would confront her mother with the fact after she had done everything. It was hard for her to think like that, but otherwise she risked shaking her own resolve under pressure from her parents. But there was another support, unfairly pushed aside by her because of her resentment: Jake. An old friend who was essentially the first to try to open her eyes. Laura felt guilty that she snapped at him that time in the cafe. He just wanted to help. It was time to restore this bridge. One evening, she dialed Jake's number. Her heart was pounding. They hadn't spoken since that meeting in over a month. He answered almost immediately. "Hello, Laura." His voice was a little tense, as if he didn't know what to expect. "Hi, Jake," she said quietly. I need to talk. Can you meet?" He didn't hesitate. "Of course. Today?" "Yes, if you succeed. In an hour in our park, on a bench by the lake, remember?" Laura couldn't help but smile through her tears. Jake had chosen their old spot where they used to feed the ducks as teenagers. "I remember. I'll be there." An hour later, she came to the familiar bench. The cold autumn wind stirred the crimson leaves. Jake was already waiting, rising to meet her. For a while, they just stood there in silence. Then Laura plucked up her courage and said quietly, "I'm sorry." Jake shook his head. What are you apologizing for? For that meeting of ours? That I ran away then, yelled at you. You wanted to warn me, but I... He interrupted gently. You were in pain. I'm not offended. I was more worried about you. Laura looked down, a lump forming in her throat. You were right, Jake, she whispered. Everything you saw, it's true. He's having an affair, probably more than one. His voice broke. Jake carefully hugged her shoulders, warming her with his body. Hush, I know, he said. It's all over now. You know that. Laura nodded, wiping away a tear. I understand, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. I've decided to file for divorce. Jake pulled back to look at her face. Is it true? Yes, she said firmly, and was surprised at how calmly her words sounded. I'm getting ready now. I'm collecting documents, money here. I brought you back, my best friend, she tried to smile. Relief and a shadow of some deep feeling flashed in Jake's eyes, which he immediately hid. He sat her down on the bench again. I'm with you, do you hear? Any time. Whatever you need, say it. Laura felt a calmness flowing from his shoulders to her. Thank you. It already helps me just to know that you are near. They had a long conversation, no longer about pain, but about practical steps. Jake turned out to be surprisingly well-versed in matters of finance and law. You need a good divorce lawyer, he said. I have a colleague who recently got divorced. I can get his lawyer's contact information. I'd be grateful, Laura nodded. Previously, the thought of turning to a lawyer had scared her, as if it would make the situation irreversible. But now she understood. The irreversible had already happened, and the help of a professional would not hurt her. That night, they parted ways well after midnight. Jake walked her home, hugging her warmly goodbye. Laura found herself thinking that, for the first time in years, she was walking home without a sense of anxiety. Her chest felt almost calm. When she returned, she found Brandon already asleep on the couch in the living room. Lately, he had increasingly chosen to spend the night separately. Looking at his silhouette in the darkness, Laura felt only a slight pity. No love or resentment, emptiness. We are already on different shores, she thought, and walked past, trying not to wake him. The resource plan began to work. Laura had her own money in the account, additional income was appearing, collected papers were lying at hand, a reliable friend was again nearby. And most importantly, she had an internal support that was growing stronger day by day. There was one more step left, to officially begin the process of liberation, and she was almost ready to do it. Laura felt that the truth was already obvious, at least to her. But now she needed hard facts to proceed. She no longer wanted to live in guesswork and suspicion. Besides, there was a legal case ahead, where extra evidence would not hurt. One early morning, fate seemed to present an opportunity. Brandon, after a quick breakfast, rushed to an unscheduled training session with a client and left his phone at home, forgetting it to charge in the kitchen. Laura discovered this a few minutes after he left. The screen flashed with an incoming call. The name Anna Hall appeared. She froze, looking at the vibrating device. When the call was dropped, her determination matured lightning fast. This was her chance to look behind the scenes of lies. The phone required a pattern. Laura had seen Brandon swipe his finger before she tried to reproduce it. Her heart was pounding. Once, twice. On the third try, the pattern matched, and the screen unlocked. She swallowed nervously, not believing her luck. The first thing she did was open the messenger. Scrolling through the chat list, Laura saw several names that made her go cold. Jessica, Christine Yoga, client_M. There were heart or kiss emoticons next to them. Her hands started shaking. She clicked on the conversation with Jessica. The messages unfolded in a long stream, interspersed with a multitude of emojis. The latest were from last night. Jessica, sweetie, I miss you. Will you be there today? Brandon, of course, kitten. Let me know when you see your husband out. Laura covered her mouth with her hand, holding back a scream. How do you send your husband away? That meant Jessica was married. That was why he didn't want to advertise their relationship. She continued reading. Jessica, He'll be leaving for his brother's until late. I'm free. I'm waiting for you, as usual. Brandon, be prepared. You won't sleep all night. Then came the explicit details that made Laura feel sick. She scrolled up, there were dozens of messages, intimate photos of Jessica, promises, meetings at different times. It turns out that the seminar Brandon went to was not a seminar at all. They spent that weekend together. Jessica wrote, "Best weekend of my life." Brandon replied, "We'll do it again soon, my wild cat." Laura pulled away from the phone as if it were burning her fingers. Her heart was fluttering, but it was no longer panic, but anger and disgust. She forced herself to continue. She needed to record everything. Quickly, while there was time, she took screenshots of key parts of the correspondence, especially where Jessica's husband's deception was mentioned. She emailed copies to herself for good measure. Next, she opened a chat with Christine Yoga. She knew this contact. Christine attended group yoga classes that Brandon sometimes taught instead of a colleague. The correspondence was shorter, but sufficient. Christina, my husband is on a business trip until Friday. Will you come by in the evening? Brandon, sure, baby. I'll pick you up at 7 and put on those underwear I like. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she continued methodically to screenshot the evidence. Another husband deceived by his absence. Other contacts, client_M, and several unnamed numbers also contained clear signs of flirting or arranged meetings. It seemed that cheating had become almost a system for Brandon. At some point, Laura's hands began to shake so much that the phone almost fell out. She realized that there was no point in reading further. Everything was clear. But she had to decide what to do with these facts. Her heart told her she was not the only victim. There were others, those same husbands who were called cuckolds behind their backs, while their wives went to the gym. Laura suddenly wanted not only to save herself, but also to warn them, these strangers. They, like her, deserved to know the truth. She quickly wrote down all the names and clues from the chats. Jessica's husband was mentioned, no name, but by last name and phone number was saved as Jessica, but her photo is visible. You can try to search. Christina's husband is away on a business trip, but she knows Christina's last name from a fitness club profile. Christina Rodriguez, husband Michael Rodriguez. It seems they've appeared together at events a couple of times. Another one was a contact under the pseudonym client_M. The messages flashed. Thanks for seeing me out at night. My husband didn't notice. There was no name, but there was a profile photo, a middle-aged woman. Laura recognized her face. It was Monica, one of the old clients, married to a businessman named Hall, who also came to pick up his wife after training a couple of times. So at least 3 families, besides her own, were caught up in this web. Laura took a deep breath. This was beyond personal resentment. There was something bigger brewing here. She couldn't keep quiet. That same day, she took action. First, she found Christina Rodriguez's social media page. She was quite active on Facebook. Scrolling through her recent posts, Laura came across a photo of her with a smiling dark-haired man and 2 teenage children on the beach. The caption, "Have a great trip, and the boys and I miss you, Michael." So, Michael Rodriguez was here. Laura clicked on Michael's profile. He had the option to send a message. My fingers trembled over the keyboard. What should I write? Hello, your wife is cheating on you with my husband. That's awful and cruel. But it's even more cruel to leave someone in the dark. She began cautiously. Hello, Michael. My name is Laura Mitchell. We have not met, but this is important. I am talking about your wife, Christina, and my husband, Brandon Mitchell, a trainer from a fitness club. I think we should talk in person. I know this is a strange message, but you will not regret it. Please let me know when and where we can meet confidentially. There was no answer for some time, but after an hour, a short reply came in private messages. Hello, I can be there today at 7 p.m., Riverside Cafe. I'll be in the corner. Michael. Laura's heart jumped into her throat. He agreed. She couldn't find a place for herself until the evening. Brandon, fortunately, stayed late as always now, for work, so the risk of running into him was minimal. Laura arrived at the cafe early. She found the right table in the back of the room. A man of about 40 was sitting at it, the same one from the photo Michael Rodriguez. He looked tense, his eyebrows were drawn together, his fingers were tapping on a glass of water. Laura approached timidly. Michael, hello, I'm Laura. He stood up, holding out his hand. Hello. I admit, I've been thinking all day about what you want to say. They sat down. Laura felt her mouth go dry. I don't even know where to begin, she muttered. Michael looked straight ahead. You wrote about my wife and your husband. What happened to them? He would obviously prefer to hear it right away. Laura gathered herself. I'm afraid of nothing good. I'm very sorry, but your wife is dating my husband. They are having an affair. Michael's face twitched, but it was as if he had expected to hear something like that. He gripped his glass so tightly that his knuckles turned white. How are you? Sure, he asked hoarsely. Laura pulled out her phone and the pre-prepared printouts of the messages. She had decided to play it safe and bring paper copies to the meeting. She unfolded the sheet of paper in front of him, containing Christina's and Brandon's messages. Michael skimmed the lines where his wife called the other baby and thanked him for the nights. He closed his eyes for a second, then swore quietly. Damn, I assumed. Laura touched his hand sympathetically. I'm very sorry. Believe me, I know how you feel now. Michael exhaled heavily, trying to pull himself together. Thank you for telling me. I have long suspected, to be honest. These eternal yoga in the evenings, intensives on weekends. He smiled bitterly. I'm glad you decided to get in touch. In response, Laura told him her story briefly. When she mentioned that she knew of other cases, Michael's eyes lit up with determination. We need to bring all this to light. This. He struggled to find the right word. Coach has broken more than one family, it turns out. Exactly, Laura nodded. And I don't want to let him do this anymore. I have a friend, Michael said suddenly. His wife also attended your husband's classes. He also suspects something is wrong. We shared our concerns once. I think we should get him involved too. Of course, Laura agreed. The more of us, the better. Michael clenched his fist. I want to look this bastard in the eye. And for my... He hesitated, for Christina to also admit everything in front of witnesses. They decided to gather the rest of the victims together. Michael promised to call that friend. His name was Tom, and Tom's wife also seemed to have meetings with Brandon under the guise of training. Laura guessed that it might be Monica Hall the description matched. If so, then 3 families were definitely involved: the Rodriguez, the Halls, and her own. The 3 of them agreed to meet the next evening at Michael's house, without the women for now, to discuss the matter first with the men. Laura was a little worried about whether she would have a place among the angry husbands, but Michael assured her, You started this fight, so you hold the cards. And frankly, we need someone cool-headed. Tom and I are on edge. They parted as allies in misfortune. Michael thanked her at parting. You are very brave. Not every woman would dig around like that and tell this to strangers. Laura just smiled sadly. There is nowhere to be braver, there is nothing to lose. I just don't want this nightmare to continue. Not anymore, he said firmly. We'll definitely figure it out together. As Laura walked home late that night, she felt for the first time not helplessness, but strength. The truth was on her side, and soon it would be known to all concerned. The end of deception was near. The tension in the kitchen was thick as steam over half-finished coffee that morning. Brandon sat at the table, arms crossed over his chest. Laura washed a mug in silence, trying to remain calm, even though she could feel his piercing gaze on her back. Finally, unable to contain himself, he spoke. Where did the money from the account go, Laura? She put the mug on the drying rack, dried her hands with a towel, and slowly turned around. I transferred them to my account. Why? Brandon's voice broke with indignation. Without my knowledge. Are you out of your mind? Laura met his gaze. The fear had disappeared somewhere. There was only cold determination in her soul. This money is half mine. I have the right to dispose of my share. Brandon slapped his hand on the table. What nonsense. We've always had everything in common. Or are you up to something? He jumped up, came closer, drilling her with his eyes. Maybe you can explain what's going on, he said through clenched teeth. You've been acting strange the last few weeks. So quiet, so independent. Now you're hiding money. What does that even mean? Laura sighed and leaned against the edge of the sink. This was it, the moment of truth. She looked at her husband, once a loved one, now a stranger and deceiver, standing before her. It means I'm not going to live the way I did before, she said calmly. I'm tired, Brandon. Tired? From what exactly? He snorted. From the good life? From lies, she said crisply. He narrowed his eyes. The same old story again? I thought we had already decided that. You yourself stopped suspecting me. I didn't stop anything, Laura replied, trying to keep her voice even. I just realized that there was no point in trying to figure things out with you. You wouldn't tell the truth anyway. Brandon smiled wryly. The truth? What other truth do you want? That I work like an ox and come home tired, and instead of gratitude at home, there are interrogations and hysterics. The hysterics ended long ago, mind you, she recalled quietly. Yes, he began to pace nervously around the kitchen. And that's not normal. It would be better if she screamed than silently did something incomprehensible behind my back. Laura felt a surge of bitter relief. Even now, when he was on the verge of being exposed, he did not ask what was hurting her, but only cared about his own comfort. She straightened up. Okay, do you want me to tell you straight? Please. I know that you cheated on me and are cheating on me. With different women. I know it almost for sure. Brandon stopped and froze. Something like fear flashed across his face, but was immediately replaced by a mask of anger. Nonsense. Are you at it again? I thought your head had cleared up, but you. That's enough. Laura cut him off quietly but sharply. Don't you dare make me out to be crazy. I know everything, Brandon. Everything. She deliberately emphasized the last word, and he seemed to understand. His pupils dilated. What? What do you know? The voice noticeably lost its intensity. About Jessica. About Christina. About Monica Hall. Should I continue? Each name struck like a whip. Brandon flinched as if he had been hit in turn. Who are you? He hissed. You yourself, essentially, with your calls, correspondence, endless lies. Laura felt herself boiling inside, but she kept herself in check. It was suddenly easy for her to speak the words seemed to be waiting for their moment. How dare you dig through my phone? He suddenly exploded, realizing the source of the leak. This is a violation of privacy. He stepped closer, his face red with rage. How dare you drag women to motels behind my back? She blurted out. How dare you destroy other people's families? Do I need to remind you how many women on your list are married? Are you proud of yourself? Shut up, Brandon barked and grabbed her shoulder. Laura didn't flinch. Strangely, she wasn't afraid of him at all anymore. She just looked straight into her husband's crazed eyes and spoke quietly, syllable by syllable. Let go. Hand. He tightened his grip on her, but she didn't flinch. They stared at each other for a few long seconds. Then Brandon pushed her away and walked away, kicking a stool in anger. So what? He muttered, trying to regain his self-confidence, although his voice was shaking. Do you think you're a saint? Do you think you were the only one like me? You're a fool. All women are the same. Laura adjusted the shoulder of her sweater and shook her head. I know you're not alone. You're telling me this now. She spoke with almost no emotion, which made Brandon even more angry. He began to shower him with insults. Who will need you after the divorce? Do you think anyone will need you, a 35-year-old with a twist? There are plenty of people like you. He began to pace around the kitchen like a caged animal. It was your mother who put all this nonsense into your head. You could have sat and been happy that a man was coming home and everything would have been fine. But no, you got involved where you weren't wanted. Laura smiled sadly. Yes, that's what my mother taught me. And you know, I'm grateful to you. Which confirmed, She was wrong. What? He stopped and stared at her, not expecting such a turn of events. I was wrong, Laura repeated evenly. A man who just sleeps at home and does whatever he wants during the day is not a family keeper. He's a family destroyer, and you destroyed ours. Brandon exhaled, a hoarse laugh escaping his chest. What do you even know? Sit quietly, don't move. Do you think it will get easier if you get divorced? Nobody needs you. I need myself, she answered. Brandon paused, taken aback by how calm and confident it sounded. Laura continued. I'm filing for divorce, Brandon. These words hung in the room like a bolt from the blue, although they were expected. No, he shook his head, as if driving away an obsession. You won't do this. I'll do it, she nodded. The documents are almost ready. He looked at her, and a whole hurricane was darting about in his eyes: anger, fear, mistrust. You won't dare. I won't give you a divorce, do you hear? He shouted. I'll drag it out for years, and you won't get a cent from me. We'll see, she answered calmly. Brandon laughed sharply, unpleasantly. Ah, I see. This is your friend, right? Jake is snitching. He's been a puppy in love with you all his life, I bet. He took advantage of the moment, right? You run to him to complain? Laura shook her head. Leave Jake alone. He has nothing to do with this. Of course, it has nothing to do with it. The husband drawled mockingly. He's just cultivating you while I'm working, and you're falling for it. Well done, what? You've found yourself a simpleton. His words missed the mark, they were downright ridiculous. Laura only smiled sadly. It's funny to hear about simpleton from a person who believed that I would forever tolerate your lies. Brandon stopped in front of her. So what next? Are you running away to your night? Or are you going to live alone? It's none of your business, she snapped. From now on, I'll live honestly, without cheating, without fear, and you. She looked at him carefully for the first time, without love, without pain, as if he were a completely stranger to her. You'll be left with nothing, Brandon. You'll have no family, no respect. Everyone in town will know who you really are. Is this a threat? He barked. A warning, she corrected. He stepped closer, looming menacingly. Just try to tell anyone I will destroy you. I will pull the threads out of you in court. You will be left on the street. Laura didn't look away. I have nothing to lose, and you can keep your threats to yourself. For the first time, Brandon was at a loss. He clearly didn't recognize his wife, and for the first time, he didn't know what to say. The usual levers of pressure didn't work. Laura turned silently and headed for the door. Where are you going? We're not finished yet. He rushed after her. She turned around at the threshold. I've said everything. If you want to continue, wait for a summons to court. And she went out, leaving him alone in the frozen silence of the kitchen. Only after she had slammed the door and was on the landing did Laura allow herself to exhale a shaky breath. Her hands were shaking, a little, emotions were still taking over, but she was proud of herself. For the first time, she had not backed down under Brandon's pressure and had not let herself be intimidated. He now knew she was leaving and not bluffing. Of course, it wouldn't be easy. He would probably try to put a spoke in her wheel. She saw how his eyes gleamed angrily. But it didn't matter. Laura had taken the main step, declaring her decision openly. From here only forward. Shortly after her confrontation with her husband, Laura went to see a lawyer. Jake got the contact information for a trusted divorce lawyer, a short, energetic man in his 50s named Mark Reynolds. In his office, with its wooden furniture and a wall covered with diplomas, Laura felt unexpectedly confident. She now had legal protection. Mark listened carefully to her story, taking notes. So, you were married for 8 years, no children together, property, house, car, coaching business. Right. Yes, the business is registered in his name, but we developed it together, Laura clarified. I understand. The business can be considered jointly acquired property, especially if you can prove your contribution. He leafed through his notes. The reason for the divorce is infidelity, right? Yes, numerous, she confirmed bitterly. I can provide evidence, correspondence, photographs. Mark nodded. In our state, unfortunately or fortunately, the no-fault principle is in effect. That is, it is not necessary to officially indicate infidelity as a reason. The court is satisfied with irreconcilable differences. However, the facts of marital infidelity can indirectly affect the division of property or alimony if it is proven that the spouse spent family money on love affairs. He spent, Laura said quietly, remembering the hotel bills and gifts that flashed through the messages. I saw hotel receipts, expensive jewelry. This is very important. Save all receipts and statements, the lawyer perked up. There is such a thing as embezzlement of marital assets. If he spent significant amounts on outside relationships, the court can compensate you for this share during the division. Laura nodded. She had been collecting papers like this for a long time, and now it made even more sense. Do you think he'll resist the divorce? Mark asked, looking at her over his glasses. Laura sighed. I think so. He's very angry. He threatened not to give a cent, to stall for time. Mark chuckled. Well, he won't be able to not give a cent. The law is the law, but he can drag out time if he wants to do dirty tricks. But here you can file a divorce without his consent. If he evades, the process will simply drag on. I would like it sooner, Laura admitted. I understand. Then our strategy is to put pressure on him to agree to the terms peacefully, the lawyer noted. You have a strong position. Cheating is a big minus on his moral side. If we hint that you have evidence of systematic cheating and embezzlement of family funds, and make it clear that we can call his mistresses to court, question them, make this story public, I think he will not want to air his dirty laundry. His reputation is important to him, right? Laura thought about how Brandon always puffed up his image as a successful coach and family man. Yes, he would be afraid of a public scandal. Yes, this may spur him to make concessions. Then let's do it this way. Mark leaned back in his chair. We are preparing a divorce suit. We indicate the general reason, discord, and impossibility of living together. But unofficially, we inform him that you have evidence of systematic infidelity and embezzlement of family funds. We offer to conclude an agreement without going to court. We put forward your conditions for the property. If he refuses, we threaten a full-fledged trial with a disclosure of all the juicy details. Honestly, in 90% of cases, such husbands prefer to negotiate. Laura felt relieved. The plan sounded reasonable. I agree. Conditions. What can I demand? Was the house purchased during the marriage? He asked. Yes, already married. We paid the mortgage together. So, it is considered common property. Either we sell and divide the money, or one buys out the other's share. Would you like to keep the house for yourself? Laura thought about it. The house was dear to her heart, but the memories there were now painful. Probably not. Better to sell and split the funds. Good. Next, joint savings, bills split in half, that's clear. One car. 2 cars. His Jeep and my small Toyota. Everyone keeps to themselves, it's simple. Business, it's more complicated. Formally, if it's opened in his name, the court can recognize the business as his personal income. But over the years of marriage, you could claim a portion of the profit. We can demand compensation or a share. For example, let him pay you a certain amount for refusing to claim the business. Laura nodded. I don't lay claim to the business itself, let him keep it. But I want financial compensation. I put in a lot of effort. This can be discussed. And finally, spousal alimony, the lawyer continued. You officially earn less. You had a break in your career, supporting him. In principle, you can request alimony for your maintenance at least for a couple of years, while you restore your income. Laura shook her head. I don't know. If I get my share, I'll manage on my own. Mark raised an eyebrow. That's commendable, but don't rush to refuse. You can use it as a bargaining chip. Suggest that you don't demand alimony if he, say, gives you a larger share of the sale of the house or a larger compensation for the business. This often works. I understand, she agreed. The main thing is for it all to end quickly. Then we give a tough ultimatum. Either sign the settlement agreement or we go to court in full, the lawyer concluded. They discussed a few other details, such as the fact that a temporary restraining order would be in place from the moment the lawsuit was filed, preventing Brandon from suddenly selling the house or moving equipment out of the studio while the divorce was going on. Laura breathed a sigh of relief. She had been afraid of that. Okay, Mark closed the folder. I'll prepare the documents. All you have to do is sign them, and we'll send them to court. Then we'll hire a courier to deliver them to Brandon. Laura suddenly remembered the upcoming meeting with the deceived husbands and the planned confrontation. She imagined the effect of serving the summons right in front of everyone. You know, I will have the opportunity to hand him the papers personally at the right moment, she said thoughtfully. The lawyer was surprised. Usually, the official server or the sheriff does this. I know, but I think I could convey it as an element of pressure. Mark smiled with the corner of his lips. Well, in some cases, it really does bring moral satisfaction to clients. The main thing is to then notify the court about the delivery. Okay, if you are sure, let's do it. Having discussed everything necessary, Laura shook the lawyer's hand. Thank you. This is my job, and I must say, you are well prepared. You did a lot yourself, collected evidence, secured finances. Not every client approaches it so responsibly. Laura just smiled sadly. I just really want to put an end to this. As she left the lawyer, she felt both relief and anxiety. Step by step, her old life was receding. Ahead lay a battle, perhaps a difficult one. But now she had a team, a lawyer and friends, and most importantly, she believed in herself. In the evening, Jake called her. So how did it go? Fine, she replied, leaning against a lamppost outside Mark's office. Filed for divorce. The words sounded casual, but inside everything shook. Here it is, it has really begun. Jake said quietly. I'm proud of you. Thank you. Laura closed her eyes and raised her face to the cool sky. I couldn't have done it without you. Nonsense. You did it all yourself, he objected softly. What next? Next. Tomorrow there's an important meeting. She meant the meeting with Michael and Tom, and then the finale of this whole story. They said goodbye. Laura walked down the steps, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. Her legal maneuver had begun. Brandon Mitchell would now officially be the defendant in the divorce case, and soon it would be handed to him personally from her hands. She imagined his face at that moment, and for the first time in a long time, she felt genuine satisfaction. The following evening, Laura arrived at Michael Rodriguez's house. The large suburban cottage, which had seemed strange and frightening to her only yesterday, had now become a kind of headquarters for justice. Michael himself met her at the entrance. Come in, Laura. Tom is already here. He led her into a spacious living room. At the window stood a man of about 40 with a tired face, whom Laura recognized from the description. Tom Hall, Monica's husband. They shook hands briefly. Pleased to meet you, even under these circumstances, Tom said in a low voice. Laura nodded. Mutual. There were already cups of coffee on the coffee table. The group sat down, Michael next to Tom on the sofa, Laura in the chair opposite. There were a few moments of silence, each collecting their thoughts. Finally, Michael spoke. Well, everyone's here. We need to decide what to do. We all have one goal: to bring this coach to justice. There was a smoldering anger in his voice. Tom nodded grimly. I want to look this scoundrel in the eye. I want to hear from him that he slept with my wife, so that he doesn't get away with it. Laura's heart sank. She understood the pain and rage of these men like no one else. He's used to getting out of it, she said quietly. I've heard lies for so many years. He'll deny it if he can. That's why we need to press him with facts, Michael replied. Christina confessed to me yesterday when I showed her the correspondence. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the difficult conversation. She cried, apologized. Of course, I said that after that, everything was over for us. But the point is that she confirmed everything. Tom clenched his fists. Monica also confessed. Under pressure, though, she yelled that it was just sex, that there was no love, as if that made me feel any better. He shook his head. Laura asked cautiously. Your wives. Do they know that you are going to meet Brandon? Michael chuckled. Christina begged me not to do it. She said she was ashamed, afraid of a scandal, but I made it clear to her. She left me no choice. Let her endure it. Tom added, Monica is not thrilled either, but I intend to, and she knows. She is more concerned about the children now I threaten to file for divorce and get the maximum in my favor. Tom's eyes flashed with anger. Michael patted him on the shoulder. We're all on edge, buddy. Laura took a sip of her cooling coffee and straightened up. I fully support the idea of a face-to-face confrontation. He should hear from us personally what we know and feel the consequences. The men nodded in agreement. How logistically? Michael asked. Where and when can we catch him? Tom suggested. He has his own hall. You can just show up there during work and in front of everyone. Laura shook her head. Better not in front of clients and staff. It's important to me that he can't hush it up again, but a public scandal is not needed now. Why? Tom frowned. I'd be happy to embarrass him in front of everyone. Laura explained. I'm not against publicity, but a little later. First, we need to make sure he doesn't run away or wriggle out of it. And if we make a scene in the hall, a fight might start. The police no use. Michael nodded his head in agreement. True. Better somewhere where we have control over the situation. We could come to my place, Tom said suddenly. I'd invite him under the pretext of, although I doubt he'll come to my place. We're not that close. What if the wives call? Michael suggested. For example, one of them makes an appointment with him, and we show up. Clever, Tom chuckled. Monica, I think, would agree to set you up. But Laura objected again. I don't think we should involve them now. They're already on edge. And I don't want to put you in a position where your wives will come between you and him again. She tactfully did not voice it, but she understood that a direct clash between husbands and wives could hinder the common cause. Then all that remains is to catch him somewhere outside of work, Michael said. He usually leaves the gym late at night, Laura said, around 10 or 11 o'clock when he finishes his last workouts. Parking, Tom squinted. Yeah, the parking lot at the gym, Michael confirmed, catching on. The place is pretty deserted at this time of day. Great, said Tom. We'll lay in wait. Laura added quietly. I'll be there too. Michael looked at her with some doubt. Are you sure? What if something goes wrong? He might get angry. I have to be, she said firmly. This is my fight too, and I have something in store for him. What exactly? Tom asked. Official documents. They will be issued tomorrow. Laura meant the divorce suit, which they promised to prepare by morning. I want to hand him the divorce papers in person, in front of you. Ha! Michael breathed out in admiration. That'll be a low blow for him. Symbolical, Tom approved. He deserves it. They were silent for a while, imagining what was to come. Then Michael clarified the plan. So, tomorrow evening, we'll meet at the gym, preferably half an hour before closing. We'll leave the cars further away so he doesn't notice us ahead of time. When he appears, all three of us go out. Tom continued, we block the escape routes. And we're talking, Michael finished, clenching his fists. We're telling him everything we think. Let him try to deny it. Laura saw his jaw tense. She interjected softly. Try to control yourself first, so that he doesn't run away. I need to have time to hand over the documents, and I'd like to hear his reaction. The men looked at each other. Tom grinned. We ourselves want to hear what the bastard has to say. Personally, I wouldn't mind making him apologize, both to us and to you, Laura. She smiled gratefully. Thank you, but I don't need his apology. It's important for me to close this page once and for all. We'll take care of it, Michael said confidently. They discussed a few more details, exchanged phone numbers for coordination. A sense of camaraderie, cemented by a common misfortune, hung in the air. In another situation, these three would never have ended up together, but now they were allies. Tom shook Laura's hand firmly as he said goodbye. You are a brave woman. Your husband fooled our wives like children, and you put an end to it. She was embarrassed. It was simply impossible to live like this any longer. Michael put his arm around her shoulder in a friendly manner. We'll finish him off tomorrow, and then we'll each go our separate ways. He smiled sadly. For example, if I have already found a lawyer, I will get divorced. Tom, too. Tom nodded. I will not forgive such betrayals. Laura looked down. Understand. Michael squeezed her shoulder. But to you, Laura, after all this, I wish real happiness. You deserve it. She felt a lump in her throat. Thank you. I wish you the strength to survive all this too. After exchanging warm, albeit sad, smiles, the allies said goodbye. As Laura left, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. Bitterness from how much pain one person's actions had brought to so many people, but also satisfaction they had not allowed themselves to be broken. They had united, and together they would see the truth through to the end. Tomorrow they will have their final showdown with the imposter. Laura was ready. In an envelope on the seat next to her lay freshly printed court documents, her weapon, her release. All that was left was to wait for the moment and put an end to it. The day dragged on painfully long. Brandon tried to do his usual things in his gym, but everything fell apart. After the morning argument with Laura, his soul was scratched by cats. She left, slamming the door, and did not contact him again. She'll think about it and come back, Brandon tried to convince himself. But inside, an anxious chill grew. This time, everything was serious. As the afternoon approached, the bad signals began to arrive one after another. First, a client canceled a personal session, citing an emergency. The woman was a friend of Christina's, and Brandon suspected something was wrong. Then came a message from Christina herself. Michael knows everything. Don't text or call. That's it between us. Brandon, reading these words on the screen, felt his knees buckle. He immediately tried to call her, no answer. He sent a series of messages, begging her to explain what had happened, but no answer came. Before he could process this, a call came from an unfamiliar number. Brandon answered, and an icy voice said, "This is Tom Hall speaking. You know who I am." Brandon caught his breath. Monica's husband. "Listen, Tom," he began, but the voice on the other end of the line was already filled with restrained rage. "No, listen to me. Stay away from my family, and be prepared to answer everything." The beeps that followed were desolate. Brandon lowered the phone, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. The world was crumbling before his eyes. He spent the afternoon at a pointless group workout, dragging his feet and not making eye contact with his clients. He felt like everyone knew something and was quietly judging him. A couple of regulars were actually whispering in the corner, glancing at him. Nervous fantasies, he tried to push the thought away, but he wasn't sure. Brandon was beside himself. The thought that Michael and Tom, the husbands of his mistresses, knew everything drove him crazy. How much did they know? Did they collude? And most importantly, where did it leak from? Christina could have let it slip to her husband. Monica, it seemed, was also pressed. But why both at once? And what did Laura have to do with her threats? He remembered her strange words. "Everyone in town will know who you are." Could it be that she had set everyone up? His heart sank. Laura could, for example, have found these husbands. But how? No, that was crazy. Almost none of the clients were left by the evening. Some had canceled their visits without explanation. Brandon paced the empty room nervously, imagining the worst-case scenarios. He thought with hatred of the ungrateful bitches, as he now called Christina and Monica. Confessed to their husbands, burst into tears, and set me up, homegrown heroines. His mind raged. And Laura, that's who started it all. It's her. She lost her tongue, the bitch. His rage grew. A plan was maturing in his head. Wait for her at home, spill everything, make her withdraw the divorce petition, teach her a lesson. But for now, he had to survive until the evening. He called Laura several times, but her phone was switched off. Brandon was so helpless that he almost threw his phone at the mirror. He had to restrain himself. By 6 o'clock in the evening, he decided to close the studio early, not waiting for the night. There were no clients anyway. He packed his things and turned off the lights. As he was leaving, he noticed an envelope with his name on it by the reception desk. He picked it up and found a copy of a complaint from a client addressed to the management of the fitness center which owned the building. The complaint was about unprofessional behavior of a trainer expressed in intimate relations with clients, which violates ethical standards. The author was a certain Mrs. Parker, apparently the same old lady who had recently become suspicious. Brandon cursed under his breath. It seemed that rumors were already spreading. As he walked out into the parking lot, he felt that it had become quite cold. It was a late autumn evening. The streetlights barely illuminated the almost empty parking lot. Brandon walked quickly to his car, looking around just in case. He felt like a cornered animal. Meanwhile, another group of people stood frozen in the shadows around the corner of the building. Laura, Michael, and Tom had arrived early and were now watching Brandon's figure flicker in the windows of the darkened hall. They saw him turn off the light, go out, pick up an envelope, and, apparently having read the contents, shake his head angrily. "Get ready, it turns out," Michael whispered, clenching his fists. Laura felt the hard envelope containing the divorce papers in her bag. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear, with determination. Tom was breathing heavily next to her, clearly struggling to contain himself. "Calm down," she reminded him quietly. "Let him understand why first." "Don't worry," Tom said through gritted teeth. "I'll keep my hands to myself for now." Brandon walked quickly across the parking lot to his car. He was about 10 meters from his car when three figures appeared from behind a nearby van. Brandon stopped abruptly. Michael, Tom, and Laura emerged from the shadows, forming a semicircle around him. He recognized the men instantly and turned pale. For a moment, no one moved. Only the cold wind rustled through the treetops. "Good evening, Coach," Michael spoke first, his voice like the crack of a whip. Brandon dropped his duffel bag onto the pavement. He could tell from the looks on their faces there was no escape. The hour of reckoning had arrived. Brandon backed away, his back hitting the cold side of his car. The three men surrounded him under the flickering light of the street lamp. In the gray light, Michael and Tom's faces looked like they were carved from stone, their eyes blazing with anger. Laura stood a little way off, holding an envelope in her hand. There was a tense silence for a few seconds. Michael spoke first. "Well, Brandon, weren't you expecting us?" Brandon's Adam's apple twitched. He tried to look brave. What do you want?" Tom stepped closer. "I think you know. We are the husbands of your clients." He almost spat out the last word. Brandon lifted his chin, trying to smirk. "So what? Your wives threw themselves at each other. I didn't drag anyone." His insolence was feigned, his voice trembled. Michael instantly grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and pressed him against the car door. "Shut up. You destroyed our families, you bastard." Brandon waved his hands. "Let go. I didn't destroy anything. It's just you who couldn't hold on to your women." The next moment, there was a dull thud as Tom hit the roof of the car with his fist a millimeter from Brandon's head, holding himself back. "One more word and the next blow will be on you," he growled. Laura felt her heart pound, but she had to do her job. Taking a step forward, she said quietly, "Brandon." He turned his gaze to his wife. Something between fear and pleading flashed in his eyes. "Laura, did you bring them?" She shook her head. "No, they came themselves. I just supported them." "So that's how it is." He smiled crookedly, although his face twitched. "So everyone united against me." Michael tightened his fist on his jacket. "You should have thought earlier about who you were deceiving." Brandon's breathing quickened, panicking as he tried to find a way out. "Listen, guys. Well, who hasn't? Well, I made a mistake. Well, forgive me." He tried to move, but Michael pushed him back. Tom blurted out, "Have you seen my children? Did you think about them when you slept with their mother?" Brandon blinked. "Tom, I didn't mean any harm. It was all without feelings, just an affair." "Shut up," Michael barked, shaking him. "Affairs? My wife is broken now. Our marriage is in pieces. Seeing that Michael and Tom were ready to tear Brandon apart, Laura raised her hand. Wait. The men reluctantly loosened their grip a little, giving her the floor. Laura came closer. Brandon looked from her to the men, his eyes darting around. Brandon, she said calmly, it's all clear. They know, I know. The truth has come out. He was breathing heavily, but remained silent, his eyes downcast. I need one thing from you, Laura continued, taking papers out of the envelope. Sign these documents, and you will never appear in my life again. She threw a copy on his hood and added crisply, This is a divorce suit. I have already filed it. Brandon stared at the sheets as if they were a snake. His face contorted. You, really? It's true, she nodded. For a moment, the parking lot was quiet. Even Michael and Tom remained silent, letting her speak. I've put up with you for so many years. Laura kept her piercing gaze on her husband. I won't any more. You're not worthy of my trust or anyone's trust at all. Brandon opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, perhaps an insult or a plea, but no sound came out. Laura felt an emptiness where there had once been love. You destroyed everything yourself. Now reap. She stepped back. Brandon seemed to cringe at her final disdain. The papers on the hood rustled in the wind. He croaked, Laura, please. But she had already turned away, giving a sign to the men. That's it. So, Mitchell, Michael said quietly, threateningly, right next to Brandon's face. Do you have anything else to tell us? Brandon suddenly snapped. Fuck you all, he shouted, spitting. It's your own fault. You should have kept your wives, not my problem. These words were the last. A muffled sound came from far away across the parking lot, then everything went silent. Jake glanced in that direction and realized they were finishing the conversation in their own way. Let's go, Laura asked quietly. The car moved off. Laura didn't turn around. She knew, under that dim street lamp, that part of her life where there was pain, humiliation, and fear lay forever. Now something new was waiting for her ahead. The family courtroom was surprisingly quiet and almost empty. It was a small, wood-paneled room with a flag hanging by the judge's lectern. Laura sat at the plaintiff's table next to her lawyer, Mark, trying to remain calm. This was, in essence, the formal end to her marriage. On the contrary, the defendant Brandon's place was empty. He preferred not to appear in person, entrusting the case to his representative. And it was even for the best Laura was not eager to see her ex-husband. According to rumors, immediately after what happened in the parking lot, Brandon left the city for a while. Perhaps he was treating a dislocated arm and a black eye. Perhaps he was just licking his wounds. He quickly realized that there was no point in fighting. A week after the confrontation, his lawyer contacted Mark and said that Brandon agreed to the terms of the divorce. The judge, an elderly man with glasses, looked through the papers. Then he looked up. The parties have reached a settlement agreement on the terms of the divorce, correct? Mark stood up. Yes, Your Honor. All contentious issues have been settled. The judge nodded and, somewhat formally, announced. The marriage between Laura Mitchell and Brandon Mitchell is dissolved. The decision will take effect in 30 days. I wish the parties good luck. The sound of the hammer sounded louder than bells to Laura. She was officially freed. She couldn't help but smile a little in relief. A few minutes later, she was walking out of the courthouse on Jake's arm. He had come to support her, sat in the back rows of the courtroom, and was now beaming with joy for her. Well, Miss Mitchell, you are free to go, he said jokingly. Laura took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. Free. The words sounded like music. She felt like she could finally breathe deeply. Mark came up to them to say goodbye. Congratulations again. You have achieved everything you wanted. Thank you very much, Laura said sincerely. Take care of yourself. The lawyer wished and disappeared into the crowd of people hurrying about their business. Jake took Laura's hand. How do you feel? She thought, listening to herself. Calm down, very calmly. And she smiled. Let's go celebrate. Maybe a cup of hot coffee? "Of course," he replied, squeezing her fingers lightly. As they walked down the street, Laura found herself, for the first time in years, not wondering where her husband was, not worrying, not looking over her shoulder. She was thinking about the present, about Jake's warm hand, about the orange leaves swirling around her feet, about the new day that awaited her tomorrow. The last few weeks have been tough. She had to rebuild her life. She and Brandon had decided to sell the house, or rather, Brandon didn't even argue. He needed the money. The proceeds were divided equally, and Laura was able to afford to make a down payment on a cozy apartment near the park where she and Jake liked to walk. She moved there right after signing the agreement, even before the trial, leaving the big house with the ghosts of the past without regrets. Her small marketing firm, essentially a home-based freelance job, began to grow. Her reputation helped. Satisfied clients recommended Laura to their friends, and the work increased. Now she hurried to her laptop in the mornings, not with a heavy heart, but with enthusiasm. She enjoyed building a career again, this time for herself. There was no sign of Brandon after he left. Mutual acquaintances whispered that he had tried to start training in a neighboring town, but word of the scandal leaked out. One of his former clients told a story about a family-destroying coach. There were no new people willing to train with him. Laura did not openly gloat, but somewhere deep down, justice had prevailed. Brandon was reaping the fruits of his actions. As for Christina and Monica, Laura had heard that both families were in the process of getting a divorce. Michael and Tom had kept in touch with her at first, exchanging news. Their union had broken up once the goal had been achieved, but they remained grateful for each other's support. Each of them had also started their lives anew, just like her. Even Laura's mother, having learned about the divorce, gradually resigned herself to it. At first, there were tears and reproaches. "Why are you like this? Be patient. Everything will work out." But seeing how calmly and confidently her daughter held herself, how she did not break down, the mother backed off. Perhaps she did not fully understand Laura's choice, but she felt in her heart. Her daughter was finally truly happy, and that meant the time of old dogmas had passed. Later that evening, Laura and Jake were sitting on the floor of her new apartment, unpacking boxes. A kettle was boiling on the stove. The spacious, bright living room was still unoccupied boxes, furniture in the process of being arranged. But Laura felt surprisingly at ease here. "You know, it seems to me that there's a special way to breathe here," she noted, straightening the curtains on the window. Jake, unrolling the package with a new tea set, raised his head. "That's because you can finally breathe freely." Laura sat down next to him and smiled. "That's probably true." He looked into her eyes seriously. "I'm happy for you. You've been through so much, and you've remained yourself. You've even become better." She laughed quietly. "It's therapy. And you?" "What about me?" Jake waved it off, embarrassed. Laura took his hand carefully. "You were always there. I'm just ready to appreciate it now." Jake froze, then gently touched her cheek with his palm. "I'm not going anywhere." They sat there on the floor among the boxes, looking at each other, and both knew that something good was ahead of them. A little later, over a cup of tea, Laura looked out the window at the setting sun. Peace reigned in her soul. She thought about the path she had taken, from a frightened girl, believing her mother's words about the need to be patient, to a woman who controls her own destiny. The ring on her finger had long been missing, and her hand only felt lighter without it. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked softly. Laura smiled brightly. "That everything will be fine." She took a last sip of tea and inhaled deeply. The air was clean, fresh, like her new life. Tomorrow was a new day without lies, without fear, with a favorite job and a true friend nearby, perhaps something more. And Laura was ready to meet this day with confidence. She stood up and threw the window wide open. A cool breeze blew into the room, ruffling the hair on her shoulders. Laura closed her eyes, enjoying the sensation. "Hey, you'll catch a cold," Jake laughed, coming over to hug her. "Nothing," she replied. "I'm just breathing. I can breathe freely." It was an early spring morning. Soft rays of sunlight were streaming through Laura's bedroom window, playing on the freshly painted walls. Laura woke up without an alarm clock, as she often did now, and the first thing she felt was a lightness in her whole body. No lump in her chest, no anxiety about someone else's schedule or suspicions. Just the morning silence and the rustle of the curtains from the draft. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, breathing evenly and deeply. It had become a special ritual for her, enjoying the freedom of her own breathing. Once she woke up heavy, barely able to breathe from anxiety. Now, every morning was a gift. Jake, who had woken up, stirred nearby. He spent almost all his nights with her, although he still officially lived in his own apartment. Their relationship developed slowly, naturally, without any deafening confessions, just two close people becoming closer to each other day after day. Laura turned her head and saw him looking at her with sleepy, warm eyes. "Good morning," he whispered, touching her forehead with his lips. "Good," she smiled. Half an hour later, they were already having breakfast in the small kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the apartment. The window was slightly open, letting in the scent of spring. It smelled of wet earth and blossoming buds. Laura closed her eyes and inhaled the aroma, feeling her heart fill with joy for no reason. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, pushing a plate of toast towards her. "About how good it is to breathe deeply," she answered slightly jokingly, but her eyes sparkled seriously. Jake nodded understandingly. He knew what she had been through, and he valued every word she said. "Are you busy today?" he asked. "A couple of calls with clients, and then I can take a day off," said Laura. "I want to take a walk in the park during the day, get some fresh air." "I'm with you," he responded immediately. After breakfast, Laura put her mail in order and answered several letters. All issues were resolved calmly, no rush jobs. She is her own boss and has long forgotten what pressure or stress from work is. Around midday, she and Jake went for a walk. Sunspots played on the park's asphalt path. Laura walked, holding Jake's elbow, and told him the latest news. A well-known company was interested in her marketing services. "Can you imagine, this could result in a long-term contract," she said animatedly. "A year ago, I couldn't even dream of this." "You're smart," Jake smiled. "It all makes sense." Laura laughed softly. It was still awkward for her to accept compliments without reservations, but she was learning. They sat down on their favorite bench by the lake. The water sparkled in the sun. A couple of ducks glided smoothly across the surface, and Laura tossed them a piece of bread she had brought specially. "Remember when we were kids and used to feed the ducks here?" she asked, smiling at the memory. "Of course," Jake nodded. "I already knew then how special you were. It's a shame life dealt you a hard time later." He stopped short, not wanting to stir up the past. But Laura wasn't sad. She just pressed herself gratefully against his shoulder. "It's all behind me. And, I don't regret anything. Without that experience, I wouldn't have become who I am." "Strong?" he prompted. "Perhaps, and knowing the value of peace." They were silent, enjoying the moment. A light breeze ruffled Laura's hair. She closed her eyes and took another deep breath. The fresh spring air filled her lungs freely, easily, without pain. Jake looked at her softly and felt that next to her was a truly happy woman. "Ready to move on?" he asked quietly, referring to the road, but Laura sensed a deeper meaning in the question. She stood up, holding out her hand to him. "Ready." Jake stood up and took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Laura took one last look at the lake, at the clear sky above. She took a deep breath and moved forward with a smile. Her breathing was even calm. Life went on, and only good days awaited her ahead, in which she, Laura, could finally breathe freely. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.